we start all these podcasts off with just a bit of an introduction, really. Yourself, what you do, and then just take us back to the early days of how you actually even got into the education.
Oh, my word.
world.
So, okay, great. Yeah. So, Jonny Uttley, I'm the CEO of the trust is called the Education Alliance. We normally call ourselves Teal because it's easier. So at the moment we're 12 schools, 4 secondaries, 7 primaries, 1 alternative provision, and we're based in East Yorkshire predominantly. So 10 of the schools are in East Yorkshire, 1 in Hull, and then 1 just up the road from where we are now in Neyburn in York, which is our... So we go from Neyburn, which has got 44 kids on roll. It's a tiny little school.
Is that really small one?
Yeah, that's right.
I go through Neyburn.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous school. It went into special measures, and so it had to join an academy trust. Nobody wanted it because it was so small. It's been open for 150 years, so we just went, yeah, we need to do this, keep this school open. And it's a lovely, lovely place. And then right through to South Hunsley, which has got 2,200 on roll. So, real kind of mix of schools. So I've been CEO for 6 years now, so just coming to 7 years. Before that, I was kind of typical CEO story. I was head teacher of the school that was the first school to academise, but I started there as a deputy head. So I'm kind of an accidental CEO, I guess. I'd just grown up through the system and inherited. The first CEO was retiring, and then they kind of took me in the room one day and were like, Chris is going to retire and we've got a succession plan and it's you basically. So, so I became CEO. But my kind of background is I'm a history and politics teacher, secondary.
Right, okay.
And so I started teaching in 98, I think, completely accidental decision. I was in America doing postgraduate work and decided I wanted to get out of that and come back to England. And genuinely, the only thing that was worrying me was how do I explain to my mum that I'm giving up on this dream that I've had for years and she's put loads into. Right. So me and my mates went to an Irish pub and just drew up a list of possible careers that we could tell my mum I was going to do. And we settled on teaching, literally. And I rang her and I was like, I'm coming back home to England, but I want to be a teacher. But what happened was I then worked as a teaching assistant at a school in Leeds, and within 2 days of being there, I was like, this is what I want to do. This is amazing, just being around young people and seeing the difference that, I know it's cliched, but it's true, the massive difference that good schools make to young people's lives. So I think teaching kind of found me. Yeah. And then I just kind of worked the way through. I think I've been really lucky. I worked with some brilliant leaders. So I was in York at Huntington School for about 8 years, worked with John Thompson there, learnt loads from him. And then when I went to South Hunsley, Chris Abbott, who was the head there, different type of leader, but learnt loads from her. I love the job. It's difficult at times. COVID was particularly hard. There's always noise out there, changes of government, Ofsted, all of that, but we just try and navigate our way through it and do the best we can do.
It's lovely. We always speak about people getting into teaching and they always fall into it. It's always like teaching found them. Your guests have said that.
Yeah.
It's like you're getting so much value, aren't you? And fulfillment, I think is the right word.
Yeah.
From doing it.
Yeah. There's a bit of me was like, how do I keep my obsession with history and politics in my career? I was like, well, what better than teaching kids about history? So that was... I don't teach now. The heads won't let me. Every year I'm like, I could do a little bit. And they're like, no, you're all right. Even during COVID, when there was like, in the worst bit during Omicron, when we were back at school, we had, masks, COVID was rife, you weren't allowed to close. And basically like you had supply teachers and anybody with a pulse and a DBS could basically stand in front of a group of kids at one point. And even during that, I was like to the heads, I was like, do you want me to come and, do a week's supply? And they were like, no, you're all right. And then one of them, the most patronising thing I've ever had in my life, they were like, we need you to do other work, Jonny, that's important. I was like, that's just
strategy work.
Yeah, completely.
I like that though.
Yeah.
I like that. I was how they worded that.
Yeah.
Give you that sort of self, a bit more importance. I'm like, my team, you are right, yes.
My team have exactly the right amount of respect for me, which is 0 basically. So yeah,
it's a lovely journey all the way through. I mean, like, do you feel the passion today for it? Like, do you have as much passion 2 days when you first started? I think, if not more.
I think I do. And I think, again, the impact that I used to hopefully see was directly the kids that you teach, and then you kind of go through leadership. And often you talk to teachers who are thinking about what they want to do in their career, and sometimes you hear, I don't want to go into leadership because I don't want to, lose my connection with my purpose and what I'm doing. But actually, you still have it. It's just you're trying to have an impact in a different way on a different scale. When I became CEO, the first term was quite hard because I felt like I'd kind of lost my purpose. There's no real blueprint for how to be a CEO in the system even now. And I think when I was ahead, if you were having a rubbish day, I used to just go and drop in classrooms for a couple of hours, and you'd come out of it and just go, do you know what? 95% of everything that's going on here is good every day. It's just that I'm focused on the negative. When I became CEO, I kind of lost that a little bit because it's not they're not my schools anymore. They're the head schools. But once you kind of navigate your way through that, and I think what we do a huge amount of is really investing a lot in staff. So I think the people bit for me now is very much about my connection with the staff and how can I help and support the staff to be brilliant for the young people that we serve. That said, yesterday I just wandered around one of our schools, and again, just what's quite interesting is you as a teacher, you get a reputation, hopefully a positive one, and you have decent relationships with kids. So they'll basically do what you say. And then you become a head, and it's great because it's like everybody knows you. So if you go, come here, son, I need to talk to you, they will because you're the head. When you become CEO, they don't really know who you are. So it's like being a newly qualified teacher again, because you're just this random adult. Just it's a proper test of can you still do it. So yeah, I mean, going around schools is always lovely, talking to staff, talking to kids and seeing what they're doing. But yeah, I think I'm as passionate now as I was at the start, I guess.
I've got 2 questions actually.
Go on. I know this week, do you know what? Well, every time with these, we do these podcasts, we always get to end, don't we? And Lee goes, I wish I'd asked that. Yeah. So today, we're actually going to get all these questions out 100%.
Firstly, I'll talk about this one because it's in context what you just said, actually. And there's some of it earlier. But do you feel, as CEO, do you like the staff in your schools? They'll obviously give you feedback, but do they appreciate the levels in a trust? Do they understand that, or are they still quite single-mindedness that I work in this school and we're not part of a bigger scheme? Is that quite hard to deliver?
It's a really great question. When we first set up as a trust, we were very much kind of, the trust sits in the background and the schools are the school. We want the schools to be the schools. We want everybody to know South Hunsley and Mallet and Driffield and so on. And the trust isn't as important. When I became CEO in 2018, and as an internal, I was kind of one of the things I famously said was, I'm not going to be one of those people who comes in and changes everything. And then within a year, we'd change everything. And the reason was we were doing a kind of piece around what's our purpose. So we were using the Simon Sinek Start with Why stuff about, kind of refreshing why do we exist as a trust. And from that work, we took a really conscious decision that the trust needed to have an identity now. The trust needed to have a voice. Because what we felt was, in a climate where it's difficult to get staff in schools and great teachers, and recruitment was really difficult, we thought, well, if you can do the double whammy of either a member of staff saying, or an applicant saying, I want to work in that school because it's a great school, that's brilliant. But if instead of that they say, we've heard about Teal and we want to work for Teal, then that's good as well. So it was a really conscious thing about changing the identity and the voice of the trust. So I think there is people could listen to this and go, well, he would say that, wouldn't he, because he's the CEO. But I do think if you talk to our staff, there's a very strong sense of, we work in the school, but we're also part of Teal. And I've got this silly little badge here, Team Teal, which looks like, the kind of cheesy corporate bit, but actually it's quite important. During COVID, in the early days when we kind of first went into lockdown, and staff, they were no longer seeing each other face to face, but they were seeing each other online, and they were collaborating loads across the schools. So history teachers in one school were helping history teachers in another school, and we were doing loads and loads of community work. I might talk about it later on. We were making PPE for the NHS. We were sending unneeded toilet rolls to elderly people who couldn't get to the shops. We were doing food parcels. We were doing loads of stuff. And people started really organically. They were writing emails and they were putting #Team Teal at the end. Right. And it was really lovely. And we kind of picked it up. And it was probably the moment actually when the sense of being part of one team and one family became really quite powerful in the trust. So I think that's, I always say we're far from perfect. There's loads of things that we need to do better. But I think one of the things that we are really good at is that sense of values and purpose that's shared, right across the trust.
I think I'll see it very, very quite clearly there. Yeah, it's like a movement, so to speak. But it's I do find that it must be hard. I think as a business merger, if someone merges someone else, there's always that sort of. I look back at The Office all the years ago, Swindon and Slough coming together. It's must be really tough, and to try and steer that ship. Yeah, you've got a David Brent maybe in charge.
It's good, and it's true, isn't it? Yeah. I spoke to a teacher the other week actually, and they were moaning about the trust. Not yours.
No.
No name dropping.
They were like, they just come in and just they make decisions that we don't agree with, and she was having it was a bit of it's a bit sad really. Whereas you've almost created. I love the fact as well that you've gone down like the Simon Sinek route. I love Simon Sinek. I've spoken about all the time. So trying to find that why, and I've done so much work on that myself personally. Yeah. So I get it.
It was one of the most exciting things we did. Cause we did the classic, Sinek bit, but when we were doing the why, and I talk about this a lot when I do public speaking, talk to the trusts and so on. We did the why are we here? So the question that we asked, literally the words were, why do you get up on a cold February morning when you're feeling rubbish and drag yourself to work when there's easy ways of earning a living? Because if you can answer that question, then you start to get to your why. And, we did it right across the trust, and you got all the kind of answers that you'd expect, which is great life chances for kids, brilliant outcomes, new opportunities, all of the stuff that you want to hear. It's the only time in my career when we've done anything like that, when we then asked another why. So for the only time ever in my career, we get asked the question, but why do we want kids to do well? Why do we want kids to get good exams? Why do we want them to go off and do brilliant apprenticeships and go to university? And when we kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and we got the answer to that question, then we had our why. So ours is we are here to make great schools and happy, strong communities so that people have better lives. And actually the two words at the end are the most important, better lives. That's the business that we're in. We are public servants and we are there to make the lives of others better. But what's also significant about ours is we don't say young people or students, we say people, because we're really conscious that we should not be running our schools in ways that are detrimental to staff and also detrimental to their families. So we're trying to really strike a balance to be a great employer, because we recognise that the best thing we can do for young people is to put brilliant people in front of them. We quite obsessed with the whole thing, and it was really, really powerful for us. And again, you go to COVID and the early days of COVID when we did not know what to do. And I wrote a letter once to all parents in the trust, and it basically said words to the effect of, right now I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but rest assured, we're going to get a plan and we're going to tell you as soon as we do. And parents were saying this is the best, most honest communication we've ever had. But all we did when we didn't know what to do was just, how do we make people's lives better tomorrow? And that's where all the stuff came from about, making PPE. One of our members of staff, her sister worked in the NHS in Leeds, and her sister was saying, it's horrible, you're coming off shifts, you're having showers, the toiletries are awful, everybody's having their skin taken off. So we went out to parents and said, if you want to donate any toiletries, when you're on your daily walk, just drop them off in this box, just walk past the school, drop them off. We got tons of, and not always cheap stuff either, like Clinique and Clarins. Wow. So we were sending these really nice facial products and things to the NHS. But again, it came from, can we do it? Yeah, we can, because it will make people's lives better. So it's really important, that whole purpose thing.
I love it. I just want to go back just a little bit to your journey in this whole thing, and you were talking about the transition in, because I think this is quite relevant, isn't it? To
I was going to ask about his mum.
Yeah, about
his mum.
Oh, yes.
Didn't we say about I was going to tell his mum what job is that? That was the next question.
Oh, that was really. In fact, we're going to go back to that actually. So I don't want to.
I was going to say, was any of your family in teaching at all?
My mum originally was a teacher when she graduated from university.
Right.
She then went into a career that there was no way I was going to follow. She became a vicar.
Right.
So she's one of the first women ever to be ordained priest in the Church of England. So she's quite my dad died when I was 5. So he was in banking. So he died when I was really small. So my mum had a 7-year-old, 5-year-old, 18-month-old, brought us all up. My brother's a successful lawyer. My sister's a nurse. I do what I do. So she's done a decent job. Then became one of the first female vicars in the country. And she doesn't, she's in her 80s now. She doesn't think she's done anything special in life. She's just like, oh, I've not. And it's like, Mum, you're this amazing, successful, pioneering woman. So, but she was originally a teacher for a few years. She was an English teacher, and then she had the family. Then my dad passed, and then she ended up working in the church.
So there's a soft spot there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and there's a kind of commitment to public service. So my brother's a lawyer, but he works a lot with the NHS. My sister's in the NHS. I'm in teaching. There's kind of the family are very much about public service and doing work for others. So I think that's where the motivation probably comes from.
Good question.
Sorry, but
No, it was I'm glad you told me. Because I was interested in the transition for you from going to teaching into then the movement and how you lost your purpose, not fully losing it, but you almost have this world, don't you, of doing one thing.
Compromise, I guess. Compromise your purpose.
1 minute you're running the jobs. We can talk it like from any business. You're running the jobs, and next minute you've got to build a team that do the thing that you were doing, and that transition is really tricky.
It really is.
Can you just talk to us about how you dealt with that and how you then pushed through? And the only reason I ask is I experienced it a couple of times, going from doing the thing to then managing people doing the thing, and it's really tricky. So just talk.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure it's probably the same for you guys. It's like to be a teacher, you're really well trained to be a teacher. So the thing I'm most well trained for is to be a teacher, and I don't do it anymore. And then everything that I've done since, the training's quite limited. So, it's a slightly scary thought, but I'm less well trained formally for what I do now than what I used to do. I think the transition from kind of teaching into senior leadership and even headship was fine, because you're still largely focused on the core of what you were trained to do. So, you're a head, and yes, you are responsible for budgets and things like that, but predominantly it's about curriculum and teaching and learning, and you feel quite comfortable doing that. And also as a head, you can effectively direct things to happen. The tricky bit was moving from that into the CEO role, because I didn't really know what a CEO was meant to do. And it was only when my director of HR at the time sat me down and she went, "Jonny, you're going to be really unhappy if you don't kind of define how you want to do this. Like, you're free to define this however you want." And that really helped. But it's understanding that you go from directing to influencing. And that's the hard bit. And I think when you understand that, it gets a bit easier. But my job now, the way I can bring about change in my trust, is to influence and convince people it's worth doing, rather than sitting there and going, "I want you to do that now, and I want you to do that." And you can theoretically do that, but it's not going to be a great, healthy organisation. So
that's like a dictatorship.
Yeah. And that, and sometimes, when we first became a trust, we were dealing with schools in really difficult circumstances. So, one of the schools was in special measures, and it was just a broken school. So you are more directive in that way. But then once the school becomes stable and a bit stronger, you can't carry on leading like that. Because you disempower people. And I think what I need to do is to support the development of people so that they can do great things. And I think that's the kind of the core of the role. But it can be frustrating. So, we talk to people, we have people who work in senior roles in schools, so, assistant heads, deputy heads, and some of them then move into trust-wide roles. And where they enjoy it and they succeed is where they are effective at influencing. And some senior leaders are great in a school because they can direct people, but find it harder across a group because they don't have as strong relationships. You don't know people as well. So you have to have that credibility so that people actually believe in what you're saying and trust in what you're saying, and then will want to do the things that you need them to do.
Yeah.
Credibility. Yeah, it's
it is. You just see it, don't you? It's moving away from that moment of doing it, and I felt it. When I was even back at Langley, and I was on the route, surveying roofs, doing the roof, going up, doing the core sample, writing the data, giving it back. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden it was like, I've now got 3 guys doing that. And you sat around scratching, well, what am I supposed to do now?
And do you find it quite hard not to kind of hover over their shoulder and go, I wouldn't do it like that, I'd do it like that. Yeah. And actually you've just got to step back and go, no, that's...
Yeah.
It's but it's really interesting. So do you work hard now on that part still? Mm-hmm. Are you constantly educating yourself on how to be better at that and do that better?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I read a lot. I talk to other people as CEOs, look at how other places are doing things. Mm. I think what I need to be quite conscious of, because I do a lot of external stuff. I do work with the DFE, different networks. I need to make sure that I'm spending as much or more time within my own trust, making sure that, we are doing things the way that we should do it in Teal, and not spending too much time kind of out there telling everybody else what we do. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. It's like, there's a risk when you start, you need to be outward facing. That's really, really important. And I think in the system now, it's really, really important that school leaders are driving change, and we're not just sitting around waiting for the government and Ofsted and all the rest of it, because we've been down that road before, and it's like, we need to be the change. So you have to be outward facing, but you also have to make sure that you're not one of those people who's out there going, everything's marvellous in my trust, when actually back at base the whole place is going up in flames, which isn't happening. But you need, you can't just be a leader for the system. You have to be a leader first and foremost for your trust, but then use that as a platform to hopefully influence positive change out there.
Definitely.
I think that's a massive point, really. That's huge. Like I say, it's you can be very passive in your own realm, focusing on what you think should be doing, and then forgetting, I'm following the process, but I'm not actually implementing I'm presenting.
Yeah.
So,
and because we've put a lot, we put a huge amount into staff and, looking after staff, developing staff well-being. And if I'm out there, as I am a lot, talking to other trusts about, but we do this around maternity pay that's better than everybody else in the system. We do, this for staff and that for staff. If their lived experience isn't as positive as I'm saying, then I lose all credibility and I just become a hypocrite. I can't be out there going, you need to look after staff if our staff feel
not looked after,
being dumped on.
Yeah.
So that's really important. And part of that, I think, we've done quite a bit of work with Apple and looking at kind of how they lead. And they've got this great phrase about managing 3 levels down. So it's the idea that, if the CEO only ever talks to their direct reports, or anybody in the organisation who only ever talks to their direct reports, they become completely cut off from the reality of what's going on in the organisation, because all you hear is the truth as per how your reports see it. So they talk about managing 3 levels down, which is basically making sure that you're always talking to, different people at different levels of organisations, which is why when I go into schools, I make sure that my conversations are with the site staff, with the reception staff, with lunchtime supervisors, because if you want to know what's really going on in a school, ask the caretaker, ask the lunchtime supervisors, ask the admin staff, because they are the ones who are proper frontline.
Yeah, it's really nice to hear. I love the mindset behind it all. I do. If I had a school, I'd join Teal. I feel like I think I'd get looked after.
Yeah,
to be honest. It's been a lovely start, just talking about the trust now, but I've had a look at, obviously, your history. You're involved with a lot. So I just want to go dig in a little bit.
I'm not very good at saying no.
When your banner shows you on BBC, on his LinkedIn profile, I'm like, what's going on here?
For the story.
So, what I got from it, because I think LinkedIn's a great place to go and learn about people, is that you are you try to be influential on the wider education itself. It isn't just about you and your setup, it's about how you can influence and help others. So just talk to us a bit about some of the extracurriculum work then, that we'll call it, that you get up to.
I mean, part of it is because I have a very short attention span. I get very bored easily, so I just need to do lots of things. There's another bit where I'm just useless at saying no. So if somebody says, would you do this? Yeah, I'll do that. So there's an element of that. But the serious point is that, we've been a trust for quite a long time now. So we first academised in 2011. So we've been around for a while. We are reasonably successful, 7,500 young people, 12 schools. Financially, we're doing okay. The schools are performing well. Our staff kind of retention and recruitment is bucking national trends. So we're in a, we're not perfect, but we're in a strong position. So I've talked to my board quite a lot about, should a multi-academy trust run schools and only run schools, or should a multi-academy trust do that and do more as well? So should it be an anchor institution in the community? Should it be part of, developing future teachers? Should it be trying to make the system better for more people? And my board are really clear that we're in a position where we ought to be doing that kind of stuff because we're in a position to do it. So that's given me sort of permission to go out there and do those things, and written into our trust strategy isn't just that the schools will do really well and that we'll train lots of new teachers, but also that we'll make a positive contribution to the system. So it's part of our strategy now. So I do, various things. The Centre for Young Lives, which is a think tank run by Anne Longfield, who was the former Children's Commissioner. I'm a visiting fellow there, which is a grand title. It just means
what does that mean? I wanted to ask you that.
It just means that I'm working with them. We're looking at, like lots of organisations are, at kind of future education policy, how the system becomes more inclusive, how we do better around things like SEND, reduce exclusions and suspensions, improve mental health of young people, all of those things that are really, really important. So we're working to develop some policy ideas around that, create networks around that. I'm also a trustee at the charity Shine. So Shine's an organisation that funds promising projects in schools to try and improve outcomes for disadvantaged young people, specifically in the north of England. So that's a really exciting thing to be involved in. And then I wrote half a book. So I co-authored a book that was published in 2020. And off the back of that has come, it's really lovely, lots of invitations to go and talk at events, work with other trusts. And I love doing that because, I feel like there's some positivity at Teal that we can help to share with others. But also every time you talk to another school leader or a policymaker, you're learning things that you can take back to base as well. So I think as a trust, we have a pretty good steer on the direction of travel, what's likely to happen in the future, what's not likely to happen. That's going to benefit, obviously, that benefits us. So yeah, it's just that it's that idea that as a system, we can either sit back and wait to be done to again and wait for the Department for Education to tell us what we need to do, wait for Ofsted to tell us what we need to do. We should be so far beyond that as a system now. We know what we're doing and we should be driving the change. Again, I know I keep going back to COVID, but it was really interesting during COVID, in the early days when we first went into lockdown and it was clear there weren't going to be any exams. Within a day of each other, the Department for Education said there'll be no league tables this year because there are no exams. And Ofsted said we won't be inspecting schools. So with league tables gone and Ofsted done, what did school leaders do the next day? They worked harder and they collaborated more and they did more imaginative things. And I think what it should have taught the system is that if we just wait for other people to tell us what to do, then things won't change. But actually, if we have the confidence to drive change, then they will. And there's lots of other people out there doing it. But yeah, it does mean that I then get to put, me sat on the Politics North sofa on my...
Is that what it was?
It was, yeah. So it was really nice as well. I got invited to talk about poverty in schools, and it was a nice session to do. But also, the journalist was absolutely lovely because my daughter's interested in journalism. She said, she can come and sit on the production desk and see how the stuff's made, and then they let her kind of come out and have her photo taken as well. So that's what the picture is. But I don't mind chatting to the media and writing stuff. I quite enjoy that sort of thing.
Lovely. Some people like it, some people don't they? It's sort of it's an acquired taste as to putting something out there.
You get teachers who are amazing in the classroom and their worst nightmare is speaking in an assembly. Not because they're worried about 300 kids, but they just don't want to talk in front of staff. So there's a lot of people in schools who just don't like public speaking, even though they're amazing teachers. And then there's people who just, I don't know, I'm probably just my big head. I just like the limelight.
I love it. Well, public speaking, more people are scared of public speaking than death, apparently.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So there you go. That's
interesting,
yeah.
I
think I can say throw a few words together rather
than... Don't you love that? Like, that setup that you've got there, how it isn't just about sat back and waiting. It's you're so forward thinking. It reminds me of me and you a little bit. We'd because we've worked with schools for years and we could sit back and wait. Or what we said is, tell you what, why don't we go out there and try and create value? Doing stuff like this.
Yeah.
Listening to this right now, no one hears that. Not unless it comes from you or, it comes from somebody else. And this is what this is. It's almost like...
It's easy to just sit back and take.
Take and wait.
Yeah.
But you've really pushed on to try and make massive difference. And I guess that's, the drive that you kind of get up for every day, isn't it? It's to keep pushing on.
Yeah.
I think what relates to that is actually when you're speaking about all the different types of schools and provisions you've got, like alternative provision and different primary, secondary. It's, I suppose, one question: what's the most difficult? What's the not difficult? What's the biggest challenge in that trying to maintain all the? Because everyone talks about standards, don't they? In education,
always
standards.
Always standards.
And like I say, I think it's quite nice to hear. And I'm not saying that. I'm sure all the other trusts do their own different things and ways to do things, but not having to follow what the auditing is doing, the Ofsted and what the DfE are telling you. But what's the biggest challenge that's preventing you creating more of a? I know it's going to be money. It's going to be cash, isn't it? But is there anything there that you think that where the system is not sort of helping you be forward thinking in certain aspects of it?
I'll park cash. We'll just say that's a given, right? So it's not that interesting to talk about.
Subjective,
again, is it? I think, for us as a trust, I think one of our key priorities going forward is to get a consistency of quality, so that you basically say, whatever Teal school you go to, you're getting the same level of greatness. It might look different in a different community, but consistent quality across the piece. And that, the more, the bigger you get, the harder that is to do. The easy way to do it, easy is probably the wrong word, but one way of doing it is to kind of just go and have, complete consistency. So everybody teaches the same curriculum, everybody teaches in the same way, everybody's behaviour policy is identical, and then you can kind of measure it. Because that's not the route we want to go down, because we want our schools to be rooted in their local communities, and therefore they might be offering slightly different things. It's harder to do, and it can be frustrating sometimes. So I guess that's one thing. And then I think probably the thing that other than money that holds the system back and makes it quite hard in schools is still this constant kind of shift around how schools are measured. So it kind of, my heart sinks with, we all know that Ofsted became really toxic, and we know that Ofsted's going to be reformed, but the ideas that are coming out are barely any better. Right. There's no big thinking going on. We still, for years and years and years, we've been measuring schools basically by what can kids do at the age of 11, what can kids do at the age of 16. But actually, if you look at what matters in life, I don't know where you guys were at the age of 16, but I was nowhere near, I was just a complete idiot, and I still was at 18 and 21 and
still are. I was
at McDonald's at 16.
At some
point,
eating
or serving.
At some point in my early 30s, I started to look marginally like an adult, But the point is, we as a secondary teacher, I've taught, and seen thousands and thousands of kids go through, and some of them at the age of 16 might get straight 9s at GCSE, and then might by the age of 21 have completely collapsed because they've got no resilience, or they can't deal with setbacks and so on. And then other times I'll be walking down the street and I'll bump into somebody who's been to my school or I've taught, and they're 28, 29, and they're like, and they still call you sir. They're like, and they're really proud. They are. And often they go, I know it was a nightmare at school. And you're like, no, you weren't that bad. But let me tell you what I'm doing now. And they're like phenomenally successful. And I think we are still obsessing about, we have to just care about what kids can do at 16 in order that we can measure schools and beat some schools on the head for not being good enough and reward other schools for what really matters probably is what are young people doing by the age of 25? And are they, what are they doing educationally? How are they doing in terms of employment, in terms of income, in terms of health, happiness, all of those things? Are they not involved in crime? How are care leavers doing? We don't look at any of that stuff properly. So I think the frustration right now for me for the system is the lack of big thinking. I think we should fundamentally change how we look at schools. We should be looking at schools and health and justice and care all together about how do we collectively support young people. And that's really absent. So it's frustrating to think that there could be huge opportunities for schools going forward if we thought quite differently. But you're tied down a bit by, Ofsted and league table measures. And
I was going to say, because your question was very relevant. Like what we were speaking about before is you're extremely forward thinking as a person, as a trust. But how much red tape then stops you from progressing? Yeah. Do you think like what you're doing then is there more? I'm guessing there's more people that think your way. You must have met lots of different people that think this way.
I think so. I think the over the last few years, the system was dominated initially by, certain big trusts, certain trusts that were kind of well connected to the previous government and so on. And when people looked at the school system or the trust system, they looked at them and thought that's how it is. Now, there are actually very, very few big trusts in the country. I can't remember the number, but in terms of school trusts that have got over 30 schools, it's a very, very small number. The vast majority of people in trusts are in kind of medium-sized or small trusts. We're the system, we're the reality, we're the norm. And within that group, you do have a different way of thinking, I think, and it is more collaborative. It's more about kind of, supporting each other, not wanting to compete with each other. And people are open to doing things differently. I think the thing that kind of holds us back, and I've done a little bit of work with, different organisations like CST, done some stuff with the new ministers, and the new ministerial team, I think, are good people who really want to make a difference and care about the right things, but they're locked into this because they're politicians, this 4-year cycle of everything, because there's an election in 4 years' time. And in 4 years' time, they have to be able to show we've done X, Y, and Z in order to get re-elected. And actually that holds the system back. It's not their fault. That's the way the system is. We need a 10, 15, 20-year plan. But what stops you from having one is the fact that there's an election in 4 years, there's an election 4 years after that. Now, I'm not saying that we should get rid of elections. I'm not, I'm not Donald Trump.
Makes sense on what you say. It does, because everyone's in short-term thinking all the time to protect themselves for the next phase. Yeah,
and actually a long-term plan for young people in the country over 10, 15 years is really what we need.
Never thought about it like that, honestly, I've never thought about that, but it's so true, isn't it?
So many layers. It's just
so many. Like every 4 years, everyone's scrapping, blaming each other for who's better, fighting.
Yeah. What's not been done?
What has been done? And sense a year,
And even worse than that as well. Like if so Bridget Phillipson, Secretary of State for Education. If in 2 years' time Starmer has a reshuffle and makes health, and somebody else comes into education, you go back to start again, don't you?
Another vision,
because they have to. I was reading. There's a book called Westminster, Westminster, How It Works and Why It Doesn't by Ian Dunt. And I was reading that, and I was reading Rory Stewart's memoirs at the same time. So he was one of the Tory ministers, but he does a great, almost as good a podcast as this, the one with Alistair Campbell.
We should tag these. The
rest is politics. But both of them were talking about this thing about it doesn't matter whether it's prisons, whether it's schools, whether it's health, but basically a minister comes in, they're ambitious, they want to make a name for themselves. So there's a disincentive to say things are working fine, let's just carry on. They have to change because they have to make a name for themselves. They have to be shown to have an impact in order that they survive politically. And actually, that's a big problem. It's not even just changing from one government to another. It's change within. And obviously, the last few years of the last government with, a new education secretary every sort of 20 minutes at one point, it was just, utterly ridiculous. And again, it goes back to that point about it's another reason we shouldn't just be waiting for what the government tell us what to do, because
I think you look at it in a business perspective. It's like the government are trying to encourage small to medium size enterprises because, like I said, you see such a damaging impact when one of the big top 100 companies goes into liquidation. It's that sort of collateral effect of like, well, if everyone down the line gets hit, that could be very similar to in a school scenario. That I'm not saying that they'll go into liquidation, but it could be so big that it's sort of going back into the old system of control by the local government, things like that. Whereas I said it'll stump the growth of the small and medium enterprise. Whereas if we try and put some controls in to say, right, let's limit how big these trusts can get, I suppose, because it provides that collaboration more on a medium scale. So it's quite interesting that looking at that. Say if you try and flip it, that they're not dictating to what you should be measured on, and actually try and set your own terms and of engagement. Yeah.
Is there anyone on? Because I don't know lots about government as
come on, Dan.
I'll give politics talk. But is anyone within the education team then that sits within government? Have they got the history or the experience of like what, say, yourself as of working within schools for so many years, or a lot of them just brought in on the basis that?
Yeah, I mean, typically they're brought into one of the schools ministers, Stephen Morgan, who's got so he's got responsibility for early years, and he was actually a play worker before he went into politics. So actually he does understand at least, young kids. Janet Darby, who's one of the care ministers, she's a former social worker. So you kind of look at people like that and think you probably get how it is on the ground.
Yeah.
But that's quite unusual. Normally people are just brought in. It's not the same with any party. It's not, a Conservative Party or Labour Party thing. They're just brought in. I think one of the things that encouraged me, again, a bit about, it's not being party political, but just the Bridget Phillipson, the Secretary of State, she was the shadow minister for about 2 years before. So she had actually, we met with her a few times. She was building up a really detailed knowledge of the school system before she went into it, which is good.
Credibility, factor again. Yeah,
that's right. I'd just leave them all in place. I'd just say if I could say to Stam, I'd just go, leave them all in place for 4 years. I know you probably don't want to, but just let them all at least have 4 years at it, so we can work with them. We can have that consistency. But
yeah, I've seen loads of noise recently on social media. I won't go into who says what or anything, but you almost have got this play, if you look over in America, where you've got Trump bringing in business minds to help run the country. Obviously, I've got an opinion on that, but you almost need that here. You need people who understand it and understand the long term, that 10 years. How long does it take to build a culture within a business? Yet we have this theory that we're going to change every 4 years. So it's actually disastrous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really it's really difficult in terms of I don't know what the solution is, because you rightly we have elections, rightly we choose. We have the right to choose different governments. But if there was a way of having one of the things you could do, and I don't think it will ever happen, but you could bring all parties together to come up with a 15-year plan for education, which they could commit to
that would
delivering
sit on the side and wouldn't be brought in to run. But
then it goes against the whole competitive nature of politics, because then how do you score points against the others, and how do you make yourself more popular than others, and all that. So it's challenging, but again, I think part of what you have to do, and I've not always necessarily been the best at this, is try to shut some of that out and not engage with it, and just crack on with, and just say, look, whoever the government is, a good school is always going to be a good school. A school where kids are happy to come, they want to come, where they have great opportunities, where they're well taught, that's always going to be a good school, isn't it?
And I guess control what you can control.
Exactly. Yeah,
not
that's
worry
right.
about the things that you can't control.
Yeah, and I'm not always. I preach that to others, and then I let myself get triggered by stuff that's going on. So I'm trying to step back a little bit from social media because I know that I've let myself go down too many rabbit holes on there, and it's just
Twitter, X. Oh my days, that can send you down some.
I'm about to delete that. I think that's gonna.
But I guess then the world that you're creating, which I think I'm getting it now, and it's making sense, is that rather than trying to change that, you create ultimately your own little zone and make sure that the policies within your world are great and do your best while almost fighting the bigger picture on the side, which is what you're doing.
I think you're right, and I think if I look back on the last 5-6 years and think about all of the best ideas that we've had that have come to fruition, they've all come from either other schools, other trusts, knowledgeable, credible people who are talking about stuff. Timpsons, we get a lot from Timpsons. We've had a bit of a mantra what Timpsons doing. They're a really forward-thinking employer, and they do some really, really interesting things for their staff. So we've looked at them. A specific example, a few years ago, found out that they were paying for HRT for so if their staff were had prescriptions for HRT, they paid for the prescriptions. So we went back. I went to see my director of HR. I was like, Timpsons are paying for HRT. Can we do that? And she was like, we could. So now we pay for any repeat medication that any members of staff have. So if you work in our trust and you're on antidepressants, asthma inhalers, HRT, you just buy a prescription certificate and we pay for it.
You're getting some ideas here.
I never knew that about Timpsons. I go past it every time I go to the supermarket.
Well, he was employing all the ex-convicts, wasn't he?
He's written a brilliant book because he's obviously gone to the House of Lords, become a minister now. He's got a brilliant book called The Happy Index. And he said that when he was CEO, he said there was just one metric that he used to look at. And I think it's every Tuesday, everybody in Timpsons every week just gives a score for how happy they are, right? And every week he looks at that and he's like, if the happy index is going up, then profits will go up. And if it's going down, we're doing something wrong. He's like, that was my key metric. And he also said we had two rules. He goes, there's only 2 rules working in Timpsons. 1, come to work looking the part. 2, put the money in the till. And he's like, beyond that, you can do whatever you want. So the managers of Timpsons branches have a huge amount of autonomy. So they can just offer a discount to a customer and so on. As long as the branch is being successful and as long as they're bringing the money in, it's a brilliant, it's a really, really interesting model.
Simple, isn't it?
But his book's fabulous. So, that's an organisation we look at. Apple, we're really interested in a lot of the stuff that they do. And looking at successful schools, looking at successful trusts, but also successful businesses and interesting thinkers like, Simon Sinek, Daniel Pink.
Who's the other guy you like?
Alex Hormozi.
That's
he's an extreme sales guy.
Right.
It's like extreme.
Bit more sales than anybody.
I love all that. Because I read loads of books, Richard Branson's books were absolutely incredible and you learn so much from it. He's got that philosophy, happy staff, and everything else just kind of takes care of itself. It almost is like this metric of, I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Worry about that. And he posts a lot on LinkedIn and every post it's just, are your staff happy?
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, there's a huge amount of trust has to go into that play though, doesn't there? But I just think reading little bits like that, snippet. I love what you're doing with it. I think it's brilliant. Yeah. Every time something happens at the trust now, I'll be like, I wonder if he's read. But I'll read some of them books. Yeah. I'm really interested.
No, it's some really good ones. There's another good one, Daniel Coyle, The Culture Code. So basically, because we obsess about culture and positive culture and healthy culture. And he basically went around a load of organisations and said, can you actually codify what great culture looks like? And he goes to Google, he goes to the Navy SEALs in America, San Antonio Spurs, a whole range of different organisations. And one of the things that he finds, and it's not rocket science, but is that in all of those organisations, staff report having a really high level of psychological safety. So they go to work, they feel safe at work, they feel happy at work, they feel they can take risks, they're supported, to take risks. If something goes wrong, they're not fearful that they're going to get taken into an office and that's the end of their career. So again, psychological safety is something we talk a lot about in the trust, about making sure that staff feel empowered to do their jobs the best way they can, to develop and to know that if something goes wrong, you just go, I got that wrong. I know why it went wrong. I'm going to do it better next time. And that people aren't, there's still too many schools and trusts where fear and anxiety is the norm. The person you spoke to about who said, the trust this and the trust that, I would imagine that they would probably report that they feel disempowered, that they feel anxious, they feel scared, that when so-and-so comes in from the trust, everybody kind of goes like that. When I go into schools, the first thing I do is say to the head, what can I do to help today? And they normally go, we're short on lunch duty, here's a jacket, get out there. There's lots of, I've got a jacket for every school.
You love that part.
I do.
Free sandwich though, we'll get a It's quite, I've probably bashed Ofsted quite a lot on this podcast last few sessions, but it's very much like, that's always feels like it has come across when it's that fear factor of like, huge. Ofsted are coming in. We need to be perfect. But like I say, it's a lot of times you speak to head teachers or CEO saying, well, we should be welcoming, going, come look at my school, come look at this. But it's so very the opposite way, like, what are they going to find? But when you've got that culture of like, well, we're just going to crack on what we're doing, then...
But even with that, there's still, and this is one of the problems with Ofsted, even with that, there is still that anxiety. We're a confident organisation. We say to heads, when Ofsted come, we're with you. It's a team effort. If something goes wrong, it's on me as much as it is on you. Try and remove that kind of. But even then, you're worried because there's too many stories where a team has picked up on something that they maybe have got wrong. We have had, touch wood, positive experiences with Ofsted. We've never had a team where you've gone, they were awful. And people who work for Ofsted are good people who want to do a good job. It's just that notion of the high stakes around if an Ofsted goes wrong, the consequences of that become so significant. And as a head, and as a CEO as well, but as a head, you are incredibly exposed publicly, in your community. If you get negative headlines, it's deeply.
Do you know what you've created though? And I think, within your team and that culture that you've created, you're almost like, if Ofsted are coming, you're all in it together.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
And you'll have some schools where it's like the teacher's going to throw a curveball here because they're not happy or they're going to do something. Whereas almost it feels like you feel protected in the fact that you sat behind 100 other people all in the same boat. Yeah,
and one of the things that we are proud of in the Ofsted, I'm not bothered about the grade, but in the written reports, our last few Ofsted reports, in all of them, it mentions, because they do talk to staff and they ask them about workload, they ask them about well-being, they ask them about how they're looked after, and they're universally positive, our reports around that, and that's really, really important. And then the other important thing, even more important, is that kids say they feel safe and they feel happy. They're the two, most important things for me. And again, I mean, it's a bit of a running joke in our trust because we, when I go in for Ofsteds to support the schools and the heads, I spend most of my time just making coffee and tea and bringing biscuits because they only want to speak to Ofsted only want to speak to me for half an hour, in 2 days. That's all they're bothered about, and that's right. But that then frees me up to try and look after people. And when things have started to go slightly awry, as they sometimes do in inspections, we tackle it collaboratively. And also we have a bit of a thing where if there's if you're in dispute with a team, which occasionally happens, it's probably better that I have the dispute with them than the head, so the head can maintain that positive relationship, and I can remind them about how they should be inspecting the school.
So sort of detached from the school itself, but even though still delivering the message. Interesting.
Have you got any more questions? Because last time we always finish, and Leo was like, I wish I'd asked that. I don't want to leave this. I could speak to you for hours on end. We've got to come to the end of this one.
I do love it. I love that each podcast we do, there's always a different element to it.
Totally different,
quite a strong politics, obviously from your background, it's going to follow through. But just before we started, obviously a big sport enthusiast as well. And it's just quite nice that it's always these different ways that we tell into different things. So it's
amazing. You know,
I'm forever learning. That's
we
why
had Mark Wilson on, didn't we?
Oh,
Wellspring.
I know Mark well. Yeah.
Can we talk? You know, like the art and stuff. Right. You know, we're going to go and have a look at the artwork, and he's into all that world. And
I've never talked about that. It was for me. It was just
didn't
like
even know about it.
Yeah.
It's been so amazing. But look, Jonny, thank you so much.
We're
going to have to get you back on because there's too much to talk about here. But thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Really
Cheers,
nice.